The Manhattan Project. From lab bench to apocalypse, from science to silence. The Manhattan Project was World War II's most ambitious science meets secrecy venture. A research and development program to build the first nuclear weapons. The United States took the lead, with the United Kingdom and Canada playing supporting roles. Think of it as the deadliest group project in history. From 1942 to 1946, Major General Leslie Groves of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers ran the show with military precision, while nuclear physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer helmed the Los Alamos laboratory, where the actual bombs were designed. Initially, the effort went by the cryptic title Development of Substitute Materials, but since the first headquarters sat in Manhattan, the far catchier Manhattan district eventually took over. The project swallowed up Britain's own nuclear effort, tube alloys, and absorbed the civilian-led US Office of Scientific Research and Development, because apparently nothing says progress like consolidating all your nuclear brainpower under military control. At its peak, the Manhattan Project employed nearly 130,000 people and burned through almost $2 billion, about $27 billion in today's money. Both enriched uranium and plutonium were pursued as bomb fuel, with over 80% of the budget spent just building and running production plants. Clinton Engineer Works in Tennessee churned out uranium, while the Hanford Engineer Works in Washington made plutonium in the world's first industrial-scale nuclear reactors. These sites were backed by a sprawling network of facilities across the US, UK, and Canada. The early plan was to use both fuels in a relatively simple, gun-type bomb design, until scientists realized plutonium didn't play nice with that method. Cue a frantic engineering pivot to the more complex implosion design. Los Alamos oversaw both designs, which became Little Boy, uranium gun type, and Fat Man, plutonium implosion. The first ever nuclear detonation came on July 16, 1945, during the Trinity test in Mexico. A moment equal parts scientific triumph, and we might have just invented the end of the world anxiety. The project also perfected how to actually drop these bombs on targets, leading to the use of Little Boy and Fat Man, Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Meanwhile, Operation Alsos sent Manhattan Project personnel to Europe, sometimes behind enemy lines, to snatch up German nuclear materials docked by scientists before the Soviets could. Ironically, despite the project's obsession with secrecy, Soviet spies still managed to infiltrate it. After the war, the Manhattan Project stuck around, overseeing weapons tests at Bikini Atoll, pushing new weapons development, laying the groundwork for America's national laboratories, dabbling in radiology research, and planting the seeds for the nuclear navy. It maintained control of US nuclear efforts until January 1947, when the newly formed United States Atomic Energy Commission took over. Let's go back to the beginning. The atomic age didn't start with a bang. It started with some very nervous scientists in 1938. That year, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann discovered nuclear fission, and Lisa Meitner with Otto Frisch explained the science behind it, making the atomic bomb not just possible in theory, but suddenly terrifyingly plausible. Refugee scientists from Nazi Germany and other fascist countries quickly realized the nightmare scenario. Hitler's regime might build one first. In August 1939, Hungarian-born physicists Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner drafted what became the famous Einstein-Szilard letter. It warned of extremely powerful bombs of a new type and urged the United States to stockpile uranium ore and speed up nuclear chain reaction research. To make sure it got noticed, they convinced Albert Einstein to sign it, then delivered it straight to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt responded by asking Lyman Briggs of the National Bureau of Standards to head an advisory committee on uranium. In October 1939, Briggs met with Szilard, Wigner, and Edward Teller. A month later, the committee told Roosevelt in no uncertain terms that uranium could be the key to bombs, vastly greater than anything now known. Basically, sir, this could make TNT look like party poppers. By February 1940, the US Navy tossed $6,000 at Columbia University, most of which Enrico Fermi and Szilard promptly spent on graphite. Along with Eugene T. Booth and John Dunning, they verified Hahn and Strassman's fission results, marking the first nuclear fission reaction in the Americas. They went on to build prototype nuclear reactors, or piles, as Fermi called them, in the basement of Columbia's Puking Hall, but they couldn't yet sustain the chain reaction. The Advisory Committee on Uranium morphed into the National Defense Research Committee's Uranium Division in June 1940, and just a year later, June 28, 1941, Roosevelt created the Office of Scientific Research and Development, OSRD, under Vannevar Bush. For security, the U word got the boot, and the project was renamed the S1 section. In July 1941, Briggs proposed spending $167,000 to study uranium-235 and plutonium, the latter having just been isolated in California that February. Meanwhile in Britain, Frisch and Rudolf Piles at the University of Birmingham had in 1939 calculated that only about 10 kilograms, 22 pounds of uranium-235 were needed for a bomb, small enough to fit in a bomber. Their March 1940 memo launched Britain's MAUD committee, which strongly recommended going all in on an atomic bomb. By July, Britain offered the US access to its research, and the Teasar mission's John Cochrane discovered to his surprise that America's program was smaller and less advanced. The MAUD findings eventually made it stateside, though not to the right people at first. In August 1941, Australian physicist Mark Oliphant flew over to find out why. He discovered the reports had basically been gathering dust, so Oliphant went on a persuasion tour, meeting with the Uranium Committee and visiting Ernest O. Lawrence in Berkeley. Lawrence was sold, started his own uranium research, and looped in James B. Coleman, Arthur H. Compton, and George B. Pegram. Mission accomplished. America's top physicists were now taking the bomb seriously. On October 9, 1941, Roosevelt officially approved the atomic program after meeting with Bush and Vice President Henry A. Wallace. He formed a top policy group including Wallace, Bush, Conant, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, and Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall to oversee the effort. The Army got the job over the Navy because, frankly, they were better at giant construction projects. Roosevelt also decided to work hand-in-hand with Britain, and just 2 days later messaged Winston Churchill suggesting they keep in touch about all things atomic. On December 18, 1941, barely a week after Pearl Harbor, the S1 committee gathered in a mood described as pervaded by enthusiasm and urgency. Translation: the gloves were off, the stakes were deadly serious, and everyone knew it. 3 isotope separation methods were already in play. At the University of California, Ernest Lawrence's team was working on electromagnetic separation. At Columbia, Eager Murphy and Jesse Wakefield Beams were pushing gaseous diffusion. And at the Carnegie Institution, later the Naval Research Lab, Philip Abinson was exploring thermal diffusion. Murphy also ran a gas centrifuge project. but that one fizzled out before it could spin into success. Meanwhile, nuclear reactor research was unfolding along two lines. Harold Urey at Columbia was studying heavy water, while Arthur Compton launched the Metallurgical Laboratory at the University of Chicago to study plutonium and reactors moderated by graphite. The S1 committee decided not to gamble. They'd pursue all five technologies. Bush, Conant, and Brigadier General Wilhelm D. Steyer, the Army's new nuclear point man, agreed and took the plan to the top policy group. The pitch, $54 million for the Army Corps of Engineers to build the facilities, $31 million for OSRD research, and $5 million for miscellaneous surprises in fiscal year 1943. On June 17, 1942, the request hit Roosevelt's desk. His response was a quick, handwritten OK FDR, proving even the biggest project sometimes starts with the smallest signatures. That same year, Compton asked J. Robert Oppenheimer to take over fast neutron research from Gregory Wright, who had resigned over concerns about loose security. John H. Manley from the Metallurgical Lab was assigned to help, coordinating the far-flung experimental teams. Oppenheimer and Robert Serber dug into neutron diffusion, how neutrons behave in a chain reaction, and hydrodynamics, how the resulting explosion will behave. To review progress, Oppenheimer and Enrico Fermi hosted a bunch of conferences. One in Chicago in June 1942, the other in California in July. Attendees included theoretical heavyweights like Hans Bethe, John Van Vleck, and Edward Teller, as well as experimentalists like Emilio Segre, Felix Bloch, and Edwin McMillan. Their verdict? Yes, a fission bomb is theoretically possible, though the how would still require a mountain of data. In 1942, the properties of uranium-235 were still hazy, and plutonium was even more mysterious. Glenn Seaborg's team had only isolated it in February 1941, and by December 1943, just 2 milligrams existed. Scientists envisioned producing it in reactors where uranium-238 would absorb neutrons from fission in uranium-235. Bomb design ideas ranged from the relatively simple, firing a cylindrical plug into a sphere of fissile material with a tamper to hold the reaction together, to early implosion concepts suggested by Richard Tolman, and even auto-catalytic designs that might boost efficiency mid-explosion. While most focused on fission, Edward Teller kept trying to sell his colleagues a super bomb, what we now call hydrogen, using a fission gas to ignite fusion in deuterium and tritium. Hans Bethe shot down every proposal, shelving the idea until after the war. Teller also tossed out to doomsday-level speculation. Could an atomic blast ignite Earth's atmosphere? Bethe crunched the numbers and declared it extremely unlikely. Scientists speak for relax, refine. A post-war report backed him up. No self-sustaining atmospheric chain reaction was possible. Still, according to Robert Serber, Oppenheimer mentioned the idea to Compton, who, quote, didn't have enough sense to shut up about it. It ended up in a Washington-bound document and, as Serber put it, was never laid to rest. The Manhattan District. In June 1942, Major General Eugene Raybould, Chief of Engineers, tapped Colonel James C. Marshall to run the Army's side of the atomic project. Marshall set up a liaison office in Washington, D.C., but planted his temporary headquarters at 270 Broadway in New York, close to Columbia University, and even closer to Stone and Webster, the project's main contractor. He also had access to his old command, the Syracuse district, the Star. His first recruit, Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Nichols, who would become his deputy and right-hand man. Most of Marshall's work centered on construction, so he teamed up with Major General Thomas M. Robbins, head of the Corps of Engineers Construction Division, and his deputy, Colonel Leslie Groves. Initially, Raybould, Somerville, and Steyer settled on the codename Development of Substitute Materials, a name that sounded suspicious enough to invite curiosity. Groves pushed for something less obvious, so following engineer tradition, they named the Army's component after the city where its offices were, the Manhattan District. Officially created on August 13th, it was also called the Manhattan Engineer District, or MED. Unlike normal engineer districts, it had no geographic boundaries, and Marshall wielded the authority of a division engineer. The official code name lingered, but Manhattan quickly took over in common use. Marshall later admitted, quote, "I had never heard of atomic fission, but I did know you couldn't build much of a plant, let alone for $90 million. For comparison, Nichols had just overseen a single TNT plant in Pennsylvania that cost $128 million. Budget estimates were vague at best. Groves likened them to telling a caterer to prepare for anywhere between 10 and 1,000 guests. Stone and Webster had already scouted the location for production facilities, and the War Production Board recommended the Knoxville, Tennessee area. It was isolated with plenty of electricity from the Tennessee Valley Authority, and rivers to provide reactor-cooled water. After surveying options, they settled on a site near Elza, Tennessee. Conan urged immediate acquisition, Steyer agreed, but Marshall hesitated, waiting to see the results of Conan's reactor experiments. Of the possible processes, only Ernest Lawrence's electromagnetic separation method looked advanced enough to start building. Marshall and Nichols began gathering resources. First up, securing a high-priority materials rating. The top wartime ratings ranged from AA1 to AA4, with AAA reserved for true emergencies. AA1 and AA2 were for absolutely essential weapons, so Colonel Lucius D. Clay, Deputy Chief of Staff for Requirements and Resources, granted them AA3, same as Nichols' TNT plant, with the promise of AAA, critical materials if needed. Marshall and Nichols were thrilled. In their minds, this project deserved more than sharing a priority rating with something as old-fashioned as TNT. By late 1942, Vannevar Bush had grown impatient with Colonel Marshall's slow pace. In his view, the Manhattan Project needed less measured caution, and more get moving now. He voiced his concerns to Harvey Bundy and Generals Marshall, Somerville, and Steyer, urging that a senior policy committee take charge, led by a prestigious officer, ideally Steyer. Somerville and Steyer, however, had another candidate in mind, Colonel Leslie Groves. General Marshall ordered Groves promoted to Brigadier General, figuring the title General would command more respect among the high-profile scientists involved. Groves would now report directly to Somerville, with Colonel Marshall answering to him. Groves set up headquarters in Washington's new War Department building, conveniently in the same location as Marshall's liaison office. On September 23, 1942, Groves officially assumed command of the Manhattan Project. That very day, he attended a meeting called by Secretary of War Henry Stimson that created the Military Policy Committee, reporting to the top policy group. Its members, Bush, with James Conant as alternate, Steyer, and Rear Admiral William R. Purnell. Groves later added Tolman and Conant as his scientific advisors. 4 days before taking command, Groves had already flexed his influence. On September 19th, he visited Donald Nelson, chairman of the War Production Board, requesting board authority to issue a coveted AAA priority rating whenever needed. Nelson hesitated until Groves threatened to take the matter to the president. The authority was granted, with Groves promising to use it sparingly. In practice, AAA proved overkill for routine needs, while AA3 was inadequate. After persistent lobbying, Groves secured AA1 status on July 1st, 1944. In Washington, Groves later remarked, quote, "Top priority meant about a week or two before something else becomes top priority." One of Groves' first big challenges was finding a leader for Project Y, the laboratory that would design and build the bomb. The logical choices, Harold Urey, Ernest Lawrence, or Arthur Compton, were too essential in their current roles. Compton instead recommended J. Robert Oppenheimer, who already had deep knowledge of the bomb design concepts. The suggestion was controversial. Oppenheimer had no administrative track record, no Nobel Prize, and a personal life that raised security red flags. His wife Kitty, his brother Frank, and even his former girlfriend Jane Tadlock had communist ties. Still, in October 1942, after a lengthy conversation, Groves and Nichols were convinced Oppenheimer understood exactly what was needed to establish and run a lab in a remote location. Groves personally overrode the security concerns, granting Oppenheimer full clearance on July 20th, 1943. In the early war years, Britain and the United States shared nuclear research but kept their programs separate. In 1940 to 41, Britain's project, Tube Alloys, was actually larger and ahead of the American effort. So when Bush and Copeland offered in August 1941 to merge the programs, British leaders declined. They had made big strides early on, but with their economy almost entirely bent toward fighting the war, they couldn't fund large-scale development. Tube alloys soon lagged behind, and the roles reversed. By January 1943, Copeland told the British they would no longer receive atomic information, except in limited areas. London briefly considered going it alone, but concluded an independent bomb couldn't be ready in time to affect the whole of Europe. By March 1943, Copeland decided that James Chadwick and a few other British scientists were too valuable to leave out, even at the risk of exposing bomb design details. That August, Churchill and Roosevelt signed the Quebec Agreement, creating a combined policy committee to coordinate US to UK efforts. Canada wasn't a signatory but got a seat at the table because of its significant contributions. The Hyde Park Aid Memorandum, signed in September 1944, extended the cooperation in the post-war era and floated the idea that when a bomb is finally available, it might be used against Japan, warning them first that more strikes would follow until they surrendered. Once cooperation resumed after Quebec, Britain was stunned at the American project's scale and spending. Chadwick dropped hopes for a wartime independent program and, with Churchill's backing, pushed for full British participation. He worked to ensure that every one of Groves' requests for assistance was met. The British mission arrived in December 1943, bringing names like Niels Bohr, Otto Frisch, Klaus Fuchs, Rudolf Peierls, and Ernest Titterton. More followed in early 1944. Scientists assigned to gaseous diffusion left by late 1944, but the 35 working under Mark Oliphant at Berkeley stayed to the war's end, as did most of the 19 sent to Los Alamos, though the latter were kept away from plutonium-related work. The Quebec Agreement also stipulated that nuclear weapons could not be used without mutual US-UK consent. In June 1945, Britain's Wilson agreed to record the bombing of Japan as a decision of the Combined Policy Committee. June 1944, the committee formed the Combined Development Trust, chaired by Groves, to secure uranium and thorium ores on the world market. Much of the accessible uranium outside Eastern Europe was in the Belgian Congo and Canada, and the Belgian government in exile was in London. Britain agreed to give the US most of the Congo ore, since they couldn't use it without American research access. In 1944, the Trust bought over £3.4 million, what was 5-6 million kilograms, of uranium oxide from Belgian Congo mines. To sidestep Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr., the Trust's funds were kept in a special account exempt from normal audits. Between 1944 and his resignation from the Trust in 1947, Groves funneled $37.5 million through it. Groves later described Britain's direct scientific input as helpful but not vital, but admitted there might have been no bomb to drop on Hiroshima without British, and particularly Churchill's push. Their wartime involvement proved crucial after the war, when the McMahon Act of 1946 abruptly cut off US nuclear cooperation, leaving Britain's own program to carry forward with wartime experience in hand. Project sites. Oak Ridge. The day after assuming command, Groves travelled with Colonel Marshall to Tennessee to inspect the proposed production site, and left impressed. On September 29, 1942, Under Secretary of War Robert P. Patterson authorized the Corps of Engineers to seize 56,000 acres by eminent domain at a cost of $3.5 million. Another 3,000 acres followed. About 1,000 families were affected by the order, effective October 7. Protests, legal challenges, and even a 1943 congressional inquiry failed to stop it. By mid-November, US Marshals were tacking eviction notices to farmhouse doors while construction crews moved in. Some families had just 2 weeks to leave land their families had worked for generations. The land grab wasn't even finished until March 1945, and the final price tag came in at only about $2.6 million, roughly $47 an acre. When Tennessee Governor Prentice Cooper was handed a proclamation declaring Oak Ridge a total exclusion zone, he angrily tore it up. Originally dubbed the Kingston Demolition Range, the site was renamed Clinton Engineer Works, CEW, in early 1943. While Stone and Webster focused on building the production lines, the architectural firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill designed housing for 13,000 residents on the slopes of Black Oak Ridge, giving the new community its name, Oak Ridge. The Army's presence grew in August 1943 when Nichols replaced Marshall as head of the Manhattan Engineer District and moved district headquarters to Oak Ridge, though the name didn't change. The following month, Turner Construction Company's Rowe Anderson subsidiary took over community management. Chemical engineers worked under tight deadlines and strict security to produce uranium enriched to 10 to 12% U-235. Oak Ridge quickly outgrew its original plan, peaking at 75,000 residents in May 1945, with 82,000 employed at CEW and another 10,000 by Rowe Anderson. Los Alamos. Project Y was briefly considered for Oak Ridge, but the decision was made to place it in a more isolated setting. Oppenheimer, who owned a ranch in New Mexico, suggested looking near Albuquerque. On November 16, 1942, he toured the Los Alamos Ranch School area with Groves, John Dudley, and others. Oppenheimer championed the location, praising its beauty as a source of inspiration. The engineers worried about the rough access roads and limited water supply, but otherwise agreed it was a good choice. On November 25th, Patterson approved acquiring the site, authorizing $440,000 for about 54,000 acres, most of it already federal land. Secretary of Agriculture Claude Wickard transferred 45,000 acres of U.S. Forest Service property to the War Department. Quote, for so long as the military necessity continues. Wartime purchases eventually totaled 49,383 acres for $414,971. Construction began in December 1942. Groves budgeted $300,000, triple Oppenheimer's own estimate. But by the time contractor Sult finished on November 30th, 1943, costs had exceeded $7 million. During the war, Los Alamos was known only as Site Y, or the Hill. The initial plan was to run it as a military laboratory, commissioning Oppenheimer and the scientists into the army. Robert Baker and Isidore Rabi pushed back, warning that many scientists would refuse. Groves, Conant, and Oppenheimer agreed on a compromise. The University of California would operate the lab under War Department contract. Dorothy Kibbin ran the Santa Fe branch office, greeting new arrivals and issuing their passes to the Hill. Chicago. On June 25, 1942, an Army OSRD council decided to build a pilot plant for plutonium production in the Argonne Forest Preserve, southwest of Chicago, designated Site A. In July, Nichols secured a lease for 1,025 acres from the Cook County Forest Preserve District, and Captain James F. Grafton became the Chicago area engineer. But the scale quickly proved too big for the location. The pilot plant shifted to Oak Ridge, leaving Chicago with a research and testing facility. Delays at Site A prompted Arthur Compton to green-light something far more daring. The construction of the world's first nuclear reactor under the standards of Staggs Field at the University of Chicago. Chicago Pile 1 required tons of ultra-pure graphite and uranium, both scarce at the time. Frank Spedding at Iowa State scraped together 2 short tons of uranium metal. Westinghouse Landfill brushed 3 more using a mixture process. Goodyear Tire built a giant balloon to encase the reactor. On December 2nd, 1942, Enrico Fermi's team achieved the first artificial, self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. The moment a reaction sustains itself became known as going critical. Compton relayed the news to President Washington with a coded message. Quote, the Italian navigator Fermi has just landed in the New World. January 1943, Grafton's replacement Major Arthur V. Peterson ordered Chicago Pile 1 dismantled and reassembled at Site A. Too risky to run a reactor in a densely populated city. Site A continued secret research for the metallurgical lab, and on May 15, 1944, Chicago Pile 3, the first heavy water reactor, went critical there. After the war, operations went about 6 miles to DuPage County, home to today's Argonne National Laboratory. Hanford. By late 1942, even Oak Ridge seemed too close to Knoxville for comfort in the event of a nuclear accident. Groves recruited DuPont in November 1942 to build the plutonium production complex. DuPont's president, Walter S. Carpenter Jr., wanted no profit, settling on a symbolic fee of $1. DuPont insisted the site be far from Oak Ridge. In December, Groves sent Colonel Franklin Matthias and DuPont engineers scouting. Matthias declared the Hanford area near Richland, Washington, ideal in virtually all respects. It was remote and sat by the Columbia River, which could feed the cooling needs of the reactors. Groves visited in January and established the Hanford Engineer Works, HEW, codenamed Site W. On February 9th, Under-Secretary Patterson approved $5 million for 430,000 acres. About 1,500 residents, plus the one of them and other indigenous groups, were displaced. Farmers pushed back over losing crops already planted. When possible, the army let them harvest before clearing the land. The acquisition dragged on and wasn't fully complete until December 1946. Work started regardless. Even without fully finalized reactor designs, construction began in April 1943 on facilities for 25,000 workers, half to live on site. By July 1944, 1,200 buildings were up, and nearly 51,000 people were in the camp, making it the third largest town in Washington state. Hanford even ran a fleet of more than 900 buses, outpacing Chicago's public transit. Like Los Alamos and Oak Ridge, Richland was gated and restricted, but it looked more like a boom town than a military fortress. Lower profile security, fewer fences, and far less barbed wire. Canada contributed on multiple fronts. Research, uranium and plutonium production, and even personnel from Los Alamos. Its facilities stretched from British Columbia to the Northwest Territories, with major wartime and post-war roles in the nuclear effort. British Columbia. Since 1930, Cominco in Trail, BC had been producing electrolytic hydrogen. In 1941, Harold Urey suggested it could also produce heavy water, a key reactor modulator. To the existing $10 million hydrogen plant, 3,215 cells consuming 75 megawatts of hydroelectric power. Secondary electrolysis units were added to boost deuterium concentration from 2.3% to an impressive 99.8%. Princeton, Hugh Taylor, developed a platinum-on-carbon catalyst for the first three stages. Urey designed a nickel-chromium one for the final stage. The upgrade cost $2.8 million, and as a sign of wartime secrecy, the Canadian government wasn't officially informed until August 1942. Trail's heavy water production began in January 1944 and ran until 1956. Its output supplied Chicago Pile 3, the first heavy water reactor using natural uranium, which went critical on May 15, 1944. Ontario. The Chalk River site in Ontario was created to move the Allied Montreal Laboratory away from a major city. A new residential community in Deep River was built at the start. The site was picked for its proximity to Ontario, Quebec's industrial base, a nearby railhead, and the large Camp Petawawa military base. Located on the Ottawa River, it had abundant cooling water. Hans von Halban became its first director, succeeded by John Cockcroft in May 1944, and then Bennett Lewis in September 1946. Chalk River's pilot reactor, ZEEP, Zero Energy Experimental Pile, went critical in September 1945, becoming the first Canadian reactor and the first completed outside the US. ZEEP stayed in service until 1970. A larger 10-megawatt NRX reactor designed during the war began operation in July 1947. Northwest Territories. Far to the north, the El Dorado mine of radium provided uranium ore for the project. adding to Canada's essential material supply. Heavy water production. DuPont preferred helium-cooled, graphite-moderated reactors, but still wanted heavy water as a backup. The heavy water program, codenamed P9, estimated a need of 3 short tons, 2.7 tons per month. Trail could only make 0.5 short tons, so Groves approved new plants at Morgantown Ordnance Works, West Virginia, Wabash River Ordnance Works, Indiana, and Alabama Ordnance Works, Alabama. These American facilities, built and run by the Army Corps of Engineers under Ordnance Department contracts, used distillation rather than electrolysis, exploiting heavy water's slightly higher boiling point. Uranium was the Manhattan Project's essential raw material. Fuel for reactors, feedstock for plutonium production, and once enriched, the explosive core of the bomb itself. In 1940, only 4 major uranium deposits were known: Colorado, northern Canada, Joachimsthal in Czechoslovakia, and the Belgian Congo. All but Joachimsthal were in Allied hands. A 1942 survey confirmed there was enough uranium to meet the project's needs. Nichols worked with the State Department to impose export controls on uranium oxides, then negotiated the purchase of 1,200 short tons, 1,100 tons, of ore from the Belgian Congo, stored in the Staten Island warehouse, along with remaining mined stocks in the Congo itself. He also secured ore from El Dorado Gold Mines refinery in Port Hope, Ontario, after the Canadian government quietly bought up enough shares to take controlling interest in the company. The Belgian Congo's ore was by far richest in uranium content. Recognizing the strategic value beyond wartime needs, American and British leaders aimed to control as much of the world's supply as possible. The Shinkolobwe mine in the Congo had been flooded and closed. Nichols tried, unsuccessfully, to negotiate with Union Miniere Director Edgar Sengier for its reopening and exclusive US access to future output. The Combined Policy Committee took over, with 30% of Union Miniere owned by British interests. Britain led negotiations. In May 1944, Sir John Anderson and Ambassador John Wynand struck a deal with Sengier and the Belgian government to reopen the mine and sell 1,720 short tons, 1,560 tons, of ore at $1.45 per pound. Meanwhile, Groves, wary of depending solely on British and Canadian sources, bought the US Canadian corporations stocks in Europe and Colorado. Processing began with dissolving raw ore in nitric acid to produce urine nitrate, which was converted into uranium trioxide and then reduced into highly pure uranium dioxide. By July 1942, Malincroft was producing a ton of pure oxide a day. But turning that oxide into metal proved slow and inconsistent. To find a better method, a branch of the metallurgical laboratory was set up at Iowa State College in Ames, Iowa, under Frank Spedding. The resulting Ames process, ready by 1943, solved the problem and became a key step in the production chain. Natural uranium is 99.3% uranium-238 and just 0.7% uranium-235. The isotope that actually sustains the chain reaction. That meant it had to be physically separated from its heavier sibling before it could be used in a bomb. The Manhattan Project tested several enrichment methods, most of them based at Oak Ridge. Centrifuges, though initially promising, failed. Electromagnetic separation, gaseous diffusion, and thermal diffusion all worked, and Groves, ever the efficiency hawk, decided in February 1943 to use the output of one method as the input for another. In April 1942, centrifuges were seen as the best bet for isotope separation. Jesse Beams had worked on the technique since the 1930s, experimenting with uranium hexafluoride gas and managing to separate U-235 in the lab. At Columbia, Carl P. Cohen built the mathematical foundation for designing large-scale centrifuge units, and Westinghouse began construction. Scaling up was daunting. Urey and Cohen estimated it would take 50,000 centrifuges with 1-meter rotors or 10,000 with 4-meter rotors, assuming such giants could even be built, to produce 1 kilogram of U-235 per day. Beam's experiments produced only 60% of the predicted yield, meaning even more centrifuges would be required. Improvements were underway, but high-speed motors, shafts, and bearings kept breaking. By November 1942, the Military Policy Committee pulled the plug. Ironically, centrifuges would become the most economical enrichment method, just not until the Soviets perfected them after the war. The University of California Radiation Laboratory developed the electromagnetic method using devices called calutrons, a mashup of California, University, and cyclotron. Charged particles were bent to the magnetic field, separating isotopes by mass. The process wasn't elegant or efficient. It required vast amounts of scarce materials, manpower, and money. But it was proven technology, could be built in stages, and carried less technical risk. The snag: copper. The electromagnetic separation, Y12, would need 5,000 short tons of it. A wartime supply was tight. Nichols found a workaround: silver. In August 1942, he asked Under Secretary of the Treasury, Daniel W. Bell, for 6,000 tons of bullion from West Point's vaults. The final tally came to 14,700 short tons, over 430 million troy ounces. The 1,000-ounce bars were cast into billets, rolled into strips, and wound onto the calutron's magnetic coils. Stone and Webster took on Y12's design and construction in June 1942. The plan called for 5 first-stage alpha racetracks and 2 final-stage beta racetracks. In September 1943, Groves approved 4 more alpha units, Alpha 2. Construction began in February 1943. The second Alpha 1 was running by January 1944. The first beta and 2 more Alpha 1 tracks followed in March, with the 4th Alpha 1 online in April. The Alpha 2 racetracks came online between July and October 1944. Tennessee Eastman ran the plant, training operators, many of them young women, dubbed the Calutron Girls. Early calutrons enriched uranium to 13 to 15% U-235. First few hundred grams went to Los Alamos in March 1944. Output was painfully low, just 1 part in 5,825 of the uranium feed came out as product, with much of the rest coating the machinery. Aggressive recovery efforts boosted yield to 10% by January 1945. In February, Alpha tracks began receiving slightly enriched feed, 1.4%, from the S50 thermal diffusion plant. In March, they were supplied with 5% feed from the K25 gaseous diffusion plant. By August, K25 was producing uranium enriched enough to feed straight into the beta racetracks. Of all the isotope separation methods, gaseous diffusion offered the biggest payoff and the biggest headaches. The principle came from Graham's law. Lighter gas molecules pass through a semi-permeable membrane faster than heavier ones. In theory, a cascade of pumps and membranes could gradually enrich uranium-235 from natural uranium. In practice, it meant designing hundreds of stages that could handle uranium hexafluoride, a corrosive gas that destroyed almost anything it touched. Research began at Columbia University with Harold Urey, Carl P. Cohen, and John R. Dunning. By November 1942, the Military Policy Committee had approved construction of a massive 600-stage plant. On December 14th, the M.W. Kellogg Company agreed to build it, creating a new subsidiary, Kellex, to handle the job. The main challenge was the barrier itself. It had to be strong, porous, and corrosion-resistant. Edward Adler and Edward Norris produced an electroplated nickel mesh, but it was too brittle in testing. A rival barrier, developed from powdered nickel by Kellex with help from Bell Telephone Laboratories and Bakelite Corporation, proved better. In January 1944, Groves ordered it into production. Kellex's design for the K-25 plant was staggering. A 4-story, half-mile-long U-shaped building containing 54 connected buildings divided into 9 sections of 6 stages each. Survey crews marked out the 500-acre site in May 1943. Construction began in October. A 6-stage pilot plant went operational in April 1944. In 1945, Groves cancelled the planned upper stages, directing Kellex to build a new 540-stage side feed plant, K-27, instead. The last K-27 unit was handed to the operating contractor, Union Carbide and Carbon, in September 1945. Total cost for both plants, $418 million. K-25 began production in February 1945. As more cascades came online, enrichment levels climbed 1.1% by April. That month, the plant began feeding on slightly enriched material from the S-50 thermal diffusion, boosting efficiency. In May, some batches hit nearly 7% enrichment. By August, all 2,892 stages were running. K-25 and K-27 reached their full stride in the post-war years, eclipsing other enrichment methods and setting the standard for the next generation of plants. Thermal diffusion, S-50. The thermal diffusion process relied on a principle described by Sidney Chapman and David Enscombe. When a mixed gas moves through a temperature gradient, heavier molecules collect at the cold end, while lighter molecules drift toward the warm end. US Navy scientists had been developing this approach, but it wasn't chosen for the Manhattan Project at first. Partly because of doubts about whether it would work, partly thanks to good old inter-service rivalry between Army and Navy. Under Philip Abelson at the Naval Research Laboratory, the Navy pressed on quietly. The breakthrough came in April 1944 when Captain William S. Parsons, overseeing ordnance development at Los Alamos, told Oppenheimer about promising results. Oppenheimer passed the news to Groves, who approved a thermal diffusion plant on June 24, 1944. Groves hired H.K. Ferguson Company of Cleveland to build the S-50 plant. The design called for 2,142 columns, each 48 feet, 15 meters, tall, arranged in 21 racks. Inside each column were 3 concentric tubes. Steam from the K-25 powers flowed downward through the innermost nickel pipe. Water at 155 degrees Fahrenheit, 68 degrees Celsius, flowed upward through the outer iron pipe, and uranium hexafluoride gas filled the middle copper pipe. Separation occurred in the space between nickel and copper. Construction began July 9, 1944, and S-50 started partial operation in September. Leaks plagued the system, forcing shutdowns, but by June 1945 the plant was turning out over 12,700 pounds, 5,770 kilograms of slightly enriched uranium. By March 1945, all 21 racks were running. At first, S50's output went straight to the Y12 electromagnetic plant. But starting that March, all three enrichment methods were linked in series. S50 boosted natural uranium from 0.71% to 0.89% U-235, which then entered the K25 gaseous diffusion plant and came out at about 23% enrichment. From there, it went to Y12, where it was raised to around 89%, enough for a bomb core. By July 1945, about 50 kilograms, 110 pounds, of this highly enriched uranium, along with some 50% enriched material, averaging to 85%, had been sent to Los Alamos. That batch became the heart of the first uranium bomb. Little Boy. Plutonium production. The Manhattan Project's second path to a bomb used plutonium. While trace amounts exist naturally, large quantities could only be made in a reactor. The process began with natural uranium bombarded by neutrons producing uranium-239, which quickly decayed into neptunium-239 and then into plutonium-239. Because only a fraction of the uranium was transformed, the plutonium had to be chemically separated from the leftover uranium, impurities, and fission products. In March 1943, DuPont began building a plutonium pilot plant on a 112-acre site at Oak Ridge. Intended to test processes for Hanford's larger facilities, it included the air-cooled X-10 graphite reactor, a chemical separation plant, and support buildings. Only the separation plant ended up serving as a true pilot, since Hanford later chose water-cooled reactors. The X-10 reactor was a massive 24-foot, 7.3 meters, cube of graphite weighing about 1,500 short tons, 1,400 tons, surrounded by 7 feet, 2.1 meters of dense concrete shield. A major challenge came from the uranium slugs, which needed aluminum coatings to prevent corrosion and stop radioactive fission products from leaking into the cooling system. Early coating attempts failed. Griselli Chemicals' hot dip method didn't work, and Alcoa's fluxless welding passed vacuum tests but failed under heat. By June 1943, production had begun anyway, with improved welding techniques developed later that year by the Metallurgical Laboratory in General Electric. X-10 went critical on November 4th, 1943, loaded with about 30 short tons, 27 tons of uranium. A week later, the load increased to 36 short tons, producing 500 kilowatts of power and the first 500 milligrams of plutonium by the end of the month. Upgrades eventually pushed its output to 4,000 kilowatts by July 1944. X-10 ran as a production reactor until January 1945, when it shifted entirely to research. Hanford reactors. For large-scale production, an air-cooled design like X-10's wasn't practical. Early plans considered helium cooling, but DuPont and the Metallurgical Laboratory settled on water cooling. Simpler, cheaper, and faster to build. The design wasn't finalized until October 4th, 1943, so Hanford's area engineer, Colonel Franklin Matthias, focused first on infrastructure, housing, roads, a rail spur, and utilities. Canning uranium slugs at Hanford began in March 1944. The Process involved cleaning, dipping in molten metals, welding under argon, and testing for leaks. At first, most slugs failed inspection, but output improved steadily. By June, production was sufficient to start the first reactor, Reactor B, on schedule. Work on Reactor B began October 10, 1943. The three reactors built during the project, B, D, and F, were sited far apart for safety. Reactor B's 120-foot, 37 meters building used 390 short tons, 350 tons of steel, 17,400 cubic yards, 13,300 cubic meters of concrete, plus tens of thousands of blocks and bricks. Construction of the reactor itself started in February 1944. On September 13, 1944, under the watch of Compton, Matthias, DuPont's Crawford Greenawalt, Leona Woods, and Enrico Fermi, who inserted the first uranium slug, Reactor B began loading. Within days, 838 tubes were in place and the reactor went critical. Then, just hours into operation on September 27th, the power level collapsed and the reactor shut down. The next day, it started again, only to shut down once more. Physicist Chen Xiong-Wu traced the cause to Zenith-135 poisoning, a neutron-absorbing fission product with a half-life of 9.2 hours. Fermi, Woods, Donald Hughes, and John Wheeler calculated its nuclear cross-section, about 30,000 times that of uranium. Fortunately, DuPont engineer George Graves had added 504 extra fuel tubes to the original 1,500 tube design. What seemed like over-engineering now became the solution. By loading all 2,004 tubes, the reactor could overcome the xenon effect and produce plutonium at full capacity. Reactor D went online December 17, 1944, and Reactor F followed on February 25th, 1945. Together with Reactor B, they formed the core of Hanford's plutonium production during the war. While the reactors could make plutonium, chemists still had to figure out how to separate it from uranium. Despite having almost no plutonium to study in 1942 and no firm knowledge of its chemical properties, at the metallurgical laboratory, Charles M. Cooper's team developed a lanthanum fluoride separation method chosen for the pilot plant. Later, Glenn C. Morgan and Stanley G. Thompson devised the bismuth phosphate process, which DuPont's Crawford Greenawalt preferred for Hanford, because lanthanum fluoride was too corrosive. Hanford adopted the bismuth phosphate method for full-scale production. Once X-10 began producing plutonium, the pilot plant put the chemistry to the test. The first run recovered only 40% of the plutonium. Over the following months, efficiency climbed to 90%. At Hanford, the 300 area was given top priority, housing facilities for materials testing, uranium preparation, and instrument calibration. One building held the canning equipment for uranium slugs. Another contained a small test reactor. Even with priority status, the 300 area fell behind schedule thanks to its complexity, specialized designs, and wartime shortages of labor and materials. Initial plans called for 2 separation plants in each processing zone, 200 west and 200 east. But this was revised to 2 TNU in 200 west and 1 in 200 east. Each plant had 4 main buildings. The Canyon process cell building, 221, the concentration building, 224, the purification building, 231, and the magazine store, 213. The canyons were enormous, 800 feet, 240 meters long, 65 feet, 20 meters wide with 40 concrete cells, each measuring about 18 by 13 by 20 feet. Construction on 221T and 221U began in January 1944. T was finished in September, U in December. The 221D building was completed in March 1945. Because of the intense radioactivity, all operations were controlled remotely using closed-circuit television, an innovation for 1943. Maintenance crews relied on overhead cranes and custom tools. The smaller 224 buildings, processing less material with lower radioactivity, were completed more quickly. 224T and 224U on October 8, 1944, and 224B on February 10, 1945. Construction on 231W purification building began April 8, 1944, before the actual purification methods had been chosen. By the end of that year, the plant was complete and the processes finalized. On February 5, 1945, Colonel Franklin Matthias personally delivered Hanford's first shipment, 80 grams of plutonium nitrate at 95% purity, to a Los Alamos courier in Los Angeles. Weapon design. In 1943, Los Alamos design work centered on a gun-type plutonium weapon nicknamed Thin Man. Early tests used tiny amounts of ultra-pure plutonium-239 made in cyclotrons, far too scarce for a weapon, but ideal for study. In April 1944, the lab received its first sample from the X-10 graphite reactor at Oak Ridge. Within days, Emilio Segre discovered bad news. Reactor-bred plutonium contained much more plutonium-240, whose high spontaneous fission rate would trigger a premature chain reaction. That meant a gun-type device would fizzle, scattering the core before most of it could fission. A faster gun was briefly considered but deemed impractical. Isotope separation between plutonium-239 and plutonium-240 was even harder than separating uranium-235 from uranium-238, and would have delayed the bomb indefinitely. The answer lay in a different approach: implosion. Physicist Seth Neddermeyer had begun exploring implosion in 1943, using explosives to crush a subcritical sphere of fissile material into a denser supercritical state. Implosion assembled the core much faster than a gun could, increasing neutron capture and material efficiency. But it was far more complex in both theory and engineering. In September 1943, John von Neumann suggested replacing Neddermeyer's cylindrical layout with a spherical one, which would allow symmetrical compression. By August 1944, Oppenheimer reorganized Los Alamos to push implosion forward under the code name FAT. Two new divisions took charge. X Division, Explosives, led by George Kistojbowski, and G Division, the Gadget, under Robert Batcher. The core innovation was explosive lens-shaped charges that would focus the blast evenly inward. Designing them was slow, frustrating work, eventually settling on two explosives, Composition B and Baritone. The final layout looked like a 32-panel soccer ball, 20 hexagonal and 12 pentagonal lenses, each weighing about 80 pounds, 36 kilograms, each with two exploding bridge wire detonators for perfect timing. Luis Alvarez's team developed those detonators, fast, reliable, and safe, while Robert Serber's Rala experiments, using lanthanum-140 as a gamma-ray source, revealed how shock waves behaved inside the imploding shell. David Hawkins later called Rala, quote, the most important single experiment affecting the final bomb design. Inside the explosive shell sat an aluminum pusher, which transitioned the blast into the uranium tamper. The tamper's role was to hold the core together as long as possible, reflect neutrons inward, and even contribute a bit of fission itself. It was coated with boron to absorb stray neutrons. At the heart sat a polonium-beryllium initiator, codenamed Urchin, designed to release a burst of neutrons at precisely the right moment. Charles Allen Thomas of Monsanto led the polonium program, the Dayton project, which supplied up to 500 curies per month. Casting the plutonium core into a perfect sphere proved another challenge. Metallurgists discovered plutonium had multiple allotropes: the brittle alpha phase at room temperature, the malleable beta phase at higher heat, and the delta phase at even higher temperatures, which could be stabilized at room temperature with certain alloys. Aluminum worked, but emitted neutrons under alpha bombardment, worsening pre-ignition risks. The solution? A plutonium-gallium alloy stable in the delta phase and workable via hot pressing. The finished sphere was nickel-plated to guard against corrosion. Working with plutonium was dangerous. By war's end, half the chemists and metallurgists had been pulled from the project after unsafe levels were detected in their bodies. A small fire in January 1945 raised fears of contaminating the entire town, prompting Groves to approve a new plutonium facility, the DP site. The first plutonium hemispheres for a bomb core were delivered on July 2nd, 1945. 3 more arrived July 26th. While Fat Man's implosion design consumed Los Alamos' focus, the uranium gun-type bomb, Little Boy, was straightforward by comparison. Parsons Ordnance Division with Francis Birch's group leading design and technical work simplified it further once plutonium was ruled out. No high-velocity gun required. Meanwhile, Edward Teller continued advocating for the Super, a hydrogen bomb using a fission device to ignite fusion in liquid deuterium. His F1 group estimated that 1 cubic meter could release the energy of 10 megatons of TNT, enough to obliterate 1,000 square miles. In June 1946, Teller's final report remained optimistic, though his colleagues were divided on its feasibility. Trinity. Given the complexity of an implosion bomb and the stakes, Los Alamos concluded there was no room for theory alone. A full-scale nuclear test was essential, even if it meant wasting precious plutonium. Oppenheimer named it Trinity. In March 1944, Kenneth Bainbridge was tasked with the job and selected a remote stretch of desert, the Alamogordo bombing range, New Mexico. Soon, a base camp rose from the sand. Barracks, warehouses, machine shops, an explosives magazine, and a commissary to feed the scientists, soldiers, and technicians. On 7th May 1945, a dress rehearsal went on. 100 tons of TNT spiked with fission products on a wooden platform 800 yards from the planned ground zero to calibrate instruments and get a taste of what was coming. General Groves dreaded explaining to Congress how $1 billion worth of plutonium could vanish in a single gun, so he ordered the construction of Jumbo, a massive steel containment vessel weighing 214 short tons. If the bomb fizzled, Jumbo might save the missiles. By the time Jumbo arrived, confidence in the implosion method had grown, and plutonium supply had improved, so Oppenheimer decided not to use it. Instead, Jumbo was perched atop a steel tower near the site as a crude gauge of the blast's strength. The bomb would vaporize the tower, jumbo remained standing. The real device, nicknamed the Gadget, was assembled at the nearby McDonald Ranch House on July 13th under Norris Bradbury's supervision, then hoisted with nerve-wracking care to the top of a 100-foot steel tower. Height would mimic an airburst from a bomber and maximize the blast effect while minimizing fallout. At 5:30 a.m. on the 16th of July 1945, the desert night briefly turned into the surface of the sun. The Gadget detonated with the force of roughly 20 kilotons of TNT. The blast left a crater 250 feet wide lined with green, glassy trinitite. The shockwave punched outward, felt over 100 miles away. The mushroom cloud climbed 7.5 miles high. Windows rattled as far off as El Paso, prompting Groves to issue a cover story. An ammunition magazine accident involving gas shells at Alamogordo Field. Oppenheimer later recalled two verses from the Bhagavad Gita as he watched. Quote, "If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the mighty one. Now I am becoming death, destroyer of worlds." The success exceeded expectations. Bainbridge cabled Stimson who was attending the Potsdam conference, and Groves rushed a fuller report by courier. When President Truman read it, his demeanor shifted noticeably. Stimson wrote in his diary that Churchill immediately noticed the change. Quote, "Now I know what happened to Truman yesterday. I couldn't understand it. When he got to the meeting after having read this report, he was a changed man." At its peak in June 1944, the Manhattan Project was a sprawling wartime enterprise employing about 129,000 people, roughly the population of a mid-sized American city. Of these, 84,500 were construction workers hammering and welding the secret cities into existence. 40,500 were plant operators keeping the machinery humming, and a modest 1,800 were military personnel keeping order and security. By mid-1945, as construction slowed, the workforce dipped to 100,000, but the military presence swelled to 5,600. Over the course of the war, more than 500,000 individuals passed through the project's gates, often without ever knowing the full nature of the work. African Americans were mostly restricted to low-paying, low-status jobs, though a handful served as scientists and technicians. Women, meanwhile, found more technical roles here than in later government projects, a byproduct of the project's extreme labor needs and its ironclad security measures. Getting skilled workers was a constant headache for Groves. In 1943, he wrangled a special labor priority from the War Manpower Commission. By March 1944, both the War Production Board and the War Manpower Commission gave the project their highest priority. In Kansas, the State Commission Director ordered that every qualified applicant walking into a U.S. Employment Service office be steered toward Hanford first. No other job offer was to be discussed until Hanford was flatly refused. For scientists, the approach was more surgical. Scientific advisors told them to compile a wish list of candidates, rating them within a bulletin and colleagues already on the inside. Groves would then send a personal letter to their university president or corporate boss, politely but firmly, asking that they be released for essential war work. The Army also served as a talent pool. The Special Engineer Detachment, SED, formed in 1943 with an authorized strength of 675, was stocked with technically skilled draftees. Women from the Women's Army Corps, WAC, joined first as clerical staff, but quickly proved invaluable in technical and scientific roles. By 1st February 1945, all military personnel in the Manhattan Engineer District, MED, including SED members, were rolled into the 9,812th Technical Service Unit, except at Los Alamos, where everyone from WAC to MPs fell under the 4,817th Service Command Unit. For medical oversight, Groves tapped Colonel Stafford L. Warren, a radiology professor from the University of Rochester School of Medicine. Warren built hospitals at Oak Ridge, Richland, and Los Alamos, while also running the MED's health and safety program. It was no small job. Workers dealt daily with toxic chemicals, high-pressure gases, high-voltage systems, explosives, and the mysterious, still poorly understood hazards of radioactivity and fissile materials. Remarkably, the project's safety record earned recognition. In December 1945, the National Safety Council awarded the Manhattan Project its Award of Honor for Distinguished Service to Safety. Between January 1943 and June 1945, there were 62 fatalities and 3,879 disabling injuries, roughly 62% below the rate for private industry. Given the scope and the nature of the work, that was no small feat. Secrecy. From the start, the Manhattan Project carried a presidential mandate for absolute secrecy. Roosevelt's order meant not just keeping the technical details under wraps, but hiding the project's very existence. A tall order when you're building vast industrial complexes employing over 100,000 people and working in a field already rich with public speculation about nuclear fission. Groves enforced an extreme form of compartmentalization. Each man should know everything he needed to know to do his job and nothing else, he declared. No room for interpretation. This need-to-know policy, he argued, didn't just safeguard information, it kept people sticking to their knitting and reminded them that the mission was about producing an end product, not satisfying personal curiosity or publishing papers. Many scientists bristled at this, convinced that science could not thrive in such a locked box. The secrecy net was wide. Groves' security teams, his own G2 intelligence unit and the FBI, investigated over 1,500 loose talk cases. He had to fend off journalists, congressmen, nosy federal officials, curious locals near plant sites, land dispute judges, and looming over it all fear of espionage or sabotage. By the war's end, Byron Price, head of the Office of Censorship, was calling the Manhattan Project the best-kept secret of the war. Life magazine estimated that before Hiroshima, perhaps a few dozen people in the entire country truly understood the project's scope. Maybe 1,000 knew it involved atomic work, and the rest, over 100,000, worked like moles in the dark. Employees were told that spilling secrets could mean 10 years in prison or a $10,000 fine, about $175,000 today. Most simply stood at their stations watching dials and switches while unknown reactions pulsed away behind thick concrete. A secret army report in December 1945 confirmed it. The project was more drastically guarded than any other highly secret war development. In the early days alone, investigators screened 400,000 potential workers and 600 companies for security risks before they ever came near the work. Atomic censorship began even before the Manhattan Project. Once war erupted in Europe in 1939, American scientists stopped publishing anything that might be militarily useful, and by 1940 scientific journals were running submissions past the National Academy of Sciences. When the Saturday Evening Post ran a piece atomic fission by William L. Lawrence in September 1940, librarians across the country were quietly told to pull that issue from their shelves. This silence did not go unnoticed overseas. In April 1942, Soviet physicist Georgy Flerov wrote to Stalin pointing out that Western Germans had suddenly gone quiet on nuclear fission, a signal that something big was happening. The Soviets promptly launched their own atomic program. For the Manhattan Project, secrecy wasn't just about keeping the public in the dark. It was about keeping Germany from accelerating its own nuclear work or trying to sabotage America's. The Office of Censorship asked newspapers and broadcasters to avoid not just the words atomic bomb, but anything from atom smashing to heavy water to cyclotrons. By early 1943, as journalists began noticing the enormous construction in Tennessee and Washington, the project started coordinating with the office on how to explain nothing at all. Sabotage was always a nagging fear, and when equipment failed, suspicion often followed. Most problems turned out to be accidents or the handiwork of grumpy employees, but one case was real enough. On the 10th of March 1945, a Japanese fire balloon struck a power line, causing a surge that briefly shut down all 3 Hanford reactors. That was the closest the project came to enemy disruption. Still, with so many people in the loop, security was a constant headache. The Army formed a special counterintelligence corps detachment just for the project. By 1943, it was clear the Soviets were probing for a way in. Lieutenant Colonel Boris Pash, head of counterintelligence for the Western Defense Command, investigated suspected espionage at Berkeley's radiation lab. Oppenheimer even told Pash about an approach from a colleague, Haakon Chevalier, who had floated the idea of passing information to the USSR. The most effective Soviet agent turned out to be Klaus Fuchs, a British mission physicist with direct access to implosion bomb design work at Los Alamos. Fuchs's betrayal wasn't uncovered until 1950 through the Venona decrypts, but when it broke, it badly strained nuclear cooperation with Britain and Canada. His exposure led to the arrests of Harry Gold, David Greenglass, and Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Other spies, George Koval, Theodore Hall, stayed hidden for decades. Measuring the exact value of the stolen secrets is tricky. The Soviet program's real bottleneck was uranium, but intelligence from Los Alamos probably saved them 1 to 2 years. Some historians argue the time advantage shrank because Soviet scientists distrusted the information enough to recheck it themselves. Alongside building the bomb, the Manhattan Project ran its own shadow war against enemy science. The Japanese program was considered a minor threat due to its lack of uranium, but early fears were that Germany might be much further along. On the project's urging, Allied forces targeted heavy water plants in German-occupied Norway with bombings and sabotage. A dedicated intelligence unit, codenamed Alsos, Grove in Greek, a nod to groves, was formed under Boris Pash, with physicist Samuel Goudsmit as scientific director. Its mission? Trail Allied advances, interrogate scientists, and seize anything that looked like nuclear work. The brief was broad, enemy tech of any kind, but the atom was the main prize. Alsos teams fanned out across the war's endgame. In Italy, it questioned University of Rome physicists. In Britain, they joined the Normandy invasion, wary enough of a German radioactive counterstrike to prep Operation Peppermint, complete with Geiger-equipped chemical warfare service units. By November 1944, after combing through France and Germany, Goudsmit concluded the German bomb effort had never left the lab bench. Still, precautions continued. Intelligence pointed to uranium and thorium processing at Oranienburg, so Groves ordered it bombed in March 1945 to keep it out of Soviet hands. In April, Alsos T-Force swept through Heckingen, Bissingen and Haigerloch, capturing reactors, heavy water, documents, and 1.5 tons of metallic uranium. The operation also netted some of Germany's top nuclear mines. Heisenberg, Hahn, Gerlach, Diebner, Weizsäcker, whisked to Britain and interned at Farnborough, where they were recorded around the clock. The war for the atom had ended, but the listening never stopped. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The only Allied plane big enough to lug around the 17-foot thin man, or the 59-inch wide fat man, was the British Avro Lancaster. But using a British bomber would have been a logistical headache. Parts, maintenance, and the awkward optics of delivering America's new ultimate weapon from someone else's plane. General Groves had high hopes for the American B-29 Superfortress, which could be modified by joining its two bomb bays. This turned out to be unnecessary after Thin Man was scrapped, since Little Boy fit into a standard bay. But modifications were still needed for both bombs. The job was codenamed Silver Sea, and in November 1943, Wright Field's engineers got to work. Test drops of both Thin Man and Fat Man pumpkin bombs, same weight and shape minus the Armageddon, took place at New Rock Army Airfield and the Naval Ordnance Test Station to perfect phasing, ballistics, and stability. On the 17th of December 1944, the 509th Composite Group was activated at Wendover Army Airfield under Colonel Paul W. Tibbets. Its 393rd Bombardment Squadron trained for long overwater flights and precision pumpkin bomb drops. Back at Los Alamos, Project Alberta, under Captain William Parsons, was formed to handle final bomb prep and delivery logistics. By July 1945, the 509th was on Tinian Island in the Marianas. The Little Boy parts were split between sea and air. Most left San Francisco on the cruiser USS Indianapolis on the 16th of July, arriving the 26th of July. The rest, 6 highly enriched uranium rings, came via 3 Douglas C-54 Skymasters of the 509th 320 Troop Carrier Squadron. 2 Fat Man assemblies flew in specially modified B-29s, and the first plutonium core was hand-carried in a C-54. By the end of December 1944, Roosevelt had instructed Groves and Secretary of War Henry Stimson that if the bombs were ready before Germany's surrender, they should be prepared for immediate use in Europe. Still, Japan was the more likely target. In April 1945, a targeting committee recommended Kokura, Hiroshima, Niigata, and Kyoto. Stimson vetoed Kyoto, citing its cultural and religious importance, and Nagasaki replaced it. In May, the interim committee, set up to advise on nuclear policy, formed a scientific panel with Compton, Fairley, Lawrence, and Oppenheimer. Their conclusion? Use the bomb as soon as possible against war-related targets surrounded by workers' homes, without warning. At the Potsdam Conference, Truman casually mentioned to Stalin that the US has, quote, a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Stalin acted unimpressed, which Truman mistook for ignorance, unaware that Soviet intelligence had been keeping Stalin thoroughly briefed. On July 2020, General Thomas T. Handy issued a strike order to General Carl Spaatz. Quote, the first special bomb will be used after about August 3rd, with more to follow as they became available. The tentative schedule, August 2nd, August 10th, handled as 24th. But weather and the need for visual targeting shuffled the dates. Hiroshima's mission moved to August 6th, Nagasaki's to August 9th. At dawn on the 6th of August 1945, the Enola Gay, silver-skinned Boeing B-29 of the 393rd Bombardment Squadron rolled down the runway at North Field, Tinian, with Colonel Paul W. Tibbets the controls. In its bomb bay sat Little Boy, the first atomic weapon ever intended for combat. Hiroshima, headquarters of Japan's 2nd General Army and 5th Division, as well as a major embarkation port, was the primary target. Kokura and Nagasaki waited as backups. Captain William Parsons, the mission's weaponeer, assembled the bomb in mid-air, both to minimize the risk of a catastrophic accident on takeoff, and perhaps to give the crew time to forget exactly what was hanging behind them. At 1,750 feet over the city, Little Boy detonated with a force of roughly 13 kilotons of TNT. The heart of Hiroshima vanished in a white flash. Its 4.7 square miles flattened and burned. Japanese officials later calculated that 69% of all buildings were destroyed and another 6 to 7% were damaged. Initial estimates counted 66,000 dead and 69,000 injured, but later figures, including enslaved Korean laborers and overlooked soldiers, suggest as many as 140,000 deaths by December 1945. 3 days later, on the morning of the 9th of August, Boxcar, another B-29, lifted off under Major Charles W. Sweeney, carrying Fat Man. This time, Commander Frederick Ashworth acted as weaponeer. Kokura was again the primary target, but thick cloud cover spoiled 3 bombing runs. Fuel running dangerously low, Sweeney turned toward the secondary target, Nagasaki. Ashworth had authority to bomb via radar if the target was obscured, but a sudden gap in the clouds revealed the city below. Fat Man fell into the Urakami Valley midway between the Mitsubishi Steel and Arms Works and the Mitsubishi Urakami Ordnance Works. The yield, about 21 kilotons, was similar to the Trinity test, but Nagasaki's hilly terrain shielded parts of the city center. Even so, 44% of the city was destroyed. Casualty estimates range from 40,000 to 80,000 dead, with at least 60,000 injured. General Groves expected to have another bomb ready by 19th of August, with 3 more in September and another 3 in October. 2 more Fat Man assemblies were already packed for shipment to Tinian, scheduled to depart Kirtland Field on the 11th and 14th of August. At Los Alamos, crews worked around the clock to cast another plutonium core. It would be pressed and coated by the 16th of August, right on time for a 19th of August strike. On the 10th of August, Truman learned a 3rd bomb was nearly ready and immediately ordered that no further atomic weapons be used without his personal approval. As Secretary Henry Wallace recalled, Truman told his cabinet, quote, "The thought of wiping out another 100,000 people was too horrible." He didn't like the idea of killing all those kids. Groves halted the 3rd Corps shipment on the 13th of August. Meanwhile, Groves had also ordered Colonel Stafford Warren to prepare a damage survey. As soon as Japan surrendered, survey teams arrived with Geiger counters in hand. Major General Thomas Fowles, Warren, and Japanese Rear Admiral Masao Suzuki leading the way. They entered Hiroshima on the 8th of September, stayed until the 14th, and surveyed Nagasaki from the 19th of September to the 8th of October. Their work and later missions led to the formation of the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. Even before the dust settled, Groves had physicist Henry DeWolf Smith draft a sanitized technical history for the public, the Smith Report. Truman himself wrote the release, which went out on the 12th of August 1945. On the 15th of August, Japan announced its surrender. The debates began almost instantly. Was it the bombs or the Soviet declaration that pushed Japan to the brink? Could atomic diplomacy or a demonstration have achieved the same end? Scientists had tried to raise such questions beforehand. Leo Szilard's petition and the Frank Report being the most notable attempts. But by the summer of 1945, the decision had already been made. The Manhattan Project emerged from the shadows in August 1945, instantly recognized as the secret force that had ended the war. General Groves moved quickly to ensure credit was given to its vast network of contractors and scientists, many of whom had labored in anonymity for years. Army-Navy E awards were presented in guarded ceremonies. Over 20 presidential medals for merit went to key figures, including Vannevar Bush and J. Robert Oppenheimer, and military contributors received the Legion of Merit. The project itself continued until December 31st, 1946, with the Manhattan District lingering on paper until August 15, 1947. Its post-war years were plagued by technical setbacks, the rapid drain of skilled personnel through demobilization, and an uncertain mission. A handful of BD and F reactors began showing signs of age and radiation damage. Graphite moderators swelled through a Wigner effect, distorting the channels that held the uranium slugs and rendering them inoperable. Production was scaled back, and B reactor was shut down to keep at least one unit on standby. Research persisted, shifting toward a new redox solvent extraction method that could recover uranium, unlike the wartime bismuth phosphate process. The Z Division, formed at Wendover Field but moved to Oxnard Field, New Mexico, in September 1945, took over bomb engineering and testing. This move marked the birth of Sandia Base, with nearby Kirtland Field used for B-29 compatibility flights and drop trials. As wartime reserve officers departed, Groves replaced them with 50 carefully chosen career officers. Economy measures followed. Nichols recommended shutting down the S-50 thermal diffusion plant and the Alpha tracks at Y-12. Both were closed by September 1946. Y-12, once a centerpiece of uranium enrichment, saw its payroll slashed from 8,600 to 1,500, saving $2 million a month. Gaseous diffusion plants, K-25 and the new K-27, now outperformed it entirely. The real hemorrhage came at Los Alamos. Talent fled as the war ended, yet enormous challenges remained. Refining the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb designs for safety and reliability, adapting implosion for uranium, and developing composite uranium-plutonium cores to stretch scarce plutonium. Oppenheimer returned to the University of California, and Groves appointed Norris Bradbury initially as a temporary replacement, only for him to remain director for the next 25 years. In a bid to improve morale, Groves authorized a flood of construction. 300 houses, better water supply, and long-promised recreational facilities. In July 1946, Manhattan Project scientists staged the world's first post-war nuclear tests, Operation Crossroads, at Bikini Atoll. Two Fat Man-type weapons, one detonated in the air and one underwater, were used to study the effects of nuclear explosions on warships. For the first time, members of the press and international observers were allowed to watch, turning the tests into a global spectacle. Political control of the atomic future became the next great contest. The Atomic Energy Act of 1946 established the United States Atomic Energy Commission, AEC, placing nuclear research and development under civilian authority, while the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project assumed military responsibilities. For many Manhattan Project veterans, the bomb's devastation triggered deep unease. Scientists, including Niels Bohr, Bush, and Cohen, urged international agreements to prevent an uncontrolled arms race. In late 1945, physicists founded the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists to warn the public of nuclear threat. In 1946, they formed the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists to press for education and policy change. That same year, the US proposed the Baruch Plan to the United Nations, a blueprint for international control of nuclear weapons and atomic energy. The plan failed, and with it, the last serious chance to prevent the nuclear arms race. By the time Japan surrendered, the Manhattan Project had consumed over $1.8 billion, less than 9 days of America's wartime spending. When the Atomic Energy Commission assumed control, in January 1947, the total had risen to $2.191 billion, with final wartime allocations totaling $2.4 billion. Fully 84% of all spending through 1945 went into the great industrial complexes at Oak Ridge and Hanford, where uranium and plutonium were wrestled into being. Construction devoured the lion's share, 74% at Oak Ridge, 87% at Hanford, with the remainder sustaining round-the-clock operations. The project's earliest funds came quietly from the Office of Scientific Research and Development. Vannevar Bush warned Roosevelt in late 1942 that public appropriations would force the Army to defend an inexplicable and impossibly expensive program before Congress. Roosevelt agreed, and the first allocations came from discretionary presidential funds. As costs mounted, so did the risk of exposure. Congress was kept largely in the dark, with appropriations tucked into obscure headings like Engineer Service Army or Expediting Production. Congressional auditors were waved away, even when the Truman Committee on Wartime Waste came calling. In 1944, to smooth budget approvals, Groves, Stimson, and Bush agreed to brief a handful of senior lawmakers in guarded terms. By March 1945, exactly 7 congressmen officially knew the project's true purpose. 5 more were shown Oak Ridge in May to quiet their doubts. In the end, the Manhattan Project produced 3 bombs used in 1945. The Trinity device, Little Boy, and Fat Man, and 1 unused Fat Man. The wartime cost per bomb averaged $500 million in 1945 dollars. For perspective, the project's total bill equaled 90% of US small arms production, excluding ammunition, and 34% of tank production during the war. Only the Boeing B-29 program cost more. The detonation of Hiroshima signaled the dawn of the atomic age, a phrase first used by William Lawrence of the New York Times, who became the project's official correspondent in 1945. Lawrence witnessed both the Trinity test and Nagasaki, penned the official press releases, and later produced a series of articles celebrating the new technology's promise. A promise that spurred nuclear programs not only in the United States, but also in the Soviet Union. The Manhattan Project's infrastructure gave rise to a permanent constellation of national laboratories. Lawrence Berkeley, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Argonne, and Ames, joined soon after by Brookhaven in New York and Sandia in New Mexico. These facilities spearheaded the era of big science, where vast resources, multidisciplinary teams, and industrial-scale engineering became the norm. project also seeded new military ambitions. The US Navy under Admiral Nimitz dispatched officers to Oak Ridge in 1946 to master nuclear propulsion. Among them was Captain Hyman G. Rickover, who would father the nuclear navy. The Air Force sent its own contingent seeking to build nuclear-powered aircraft, a program ultimately abandoned in the face of formidable technical barriers. In medicine and research, the project's reactors produced unprecedented quantities of radioisotopes, ushering in new diagnostic and therapeutic tools for cancer treatment, and new possibilities for biology, agriculture, and industry. By mid-1946, Oak Ridge was distributing isotopes such as iodine-131 and phosphorus-32 to hospitals and universities around the world. But the speed, secrecy, and novelty of the work also left behind a heavy environmental burden. At Hanford, corrosive and radioactive wastes were stored in hastily built single-shell tanks intended as a temporary measure. Neglected afterward, many eventually leaked, making Hanford one of the most contaminated nuclear waste sites in North America, a problem that would haunt the nation for decades. On transferring authority to the Atomic Energy Commission in 1947, Groves addressed the thousands who had built the bomb. Quote, 5 years ago, the idea of atomic power was only a dream. You have made that dream a reality. You have seized upon the most nebulous of ideas and translated them into actualities. You have built cities where none were known before. You have constructed industrial plants of a magnitude to a precision heretofore deemed impossible. You built the weapon which ended the war and thereby saved countless American lives.